Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the folks who sift through all those technical papers and articles for you, pulling out the practical insights you need. Today, we're getting our hands dirty with fluid mechanics, specifically pump selection. Whether you're running a huge industrial setup, managing city water, or even just a tricky home well system, picking the wrong pump. Well, it leads to all sorts of headaches, downtime, airlocks, constant filling. It's fundamental. But often, honestly, it's overlooked. Our sources today really focus on the two main players in the centrifugal pump world. The standard centrifugal pump, let's call it the SCP, and its more specialized cousin, the self-priming pump, or SPP. So our mission here is simple. Cut through the complexity, we'll look at the real engineering differences, the trade-offs, cost versus efficiency, and figure out exactly when you choose one over the other, a shortcut to getting it right.
Right. And it's key to remember they share the same basic principle. Both are centrifugal pumps. That means they use a spinning impeller driven by a motor. This converts rotational energy into moving fluid. The impeller spins fast inside a casing, flinging the liquid outwards by centrifugal force, pushing it towards the discharge. That's the core mechanism for both.
Okay, so let's start with the basic one, the SCP, the standard. This is the pump you see pretty much everywhere, right? The workhorse. Like you said, the impeller throws liquid out. But that action also creates a low-pressure spot at the center, the impeller eye. And it's that pressure drop, that vacuum effect, that pulls more liquid in from the suction side, keeps the whole thing flowing.
Exactly. But here's the big but with the SCP. It's critical weakness, you could say. It has to have liquid filling the casing and the suction pipe before you turn it on. It needs to be primed or have what we call flooded suction. If there's air in there, it just won't work. It can't get the air out by itself.
Why not? What's the big deal with a bit of air?
Well, air is just so much less dense than liquid. The impeller spinning in air, it basically can't generate enough force, enough pressure difference to overcome atmospheric pressure and lift the liquid. It just whips the air around. You might hear it whining. It might get hot, but no fluid moves. It's airlocked.
Ah, okay. And then you're stuck manually filling it.
Yeah.
Right, which sounds like a real pain.
It is. Time-consuming, messy sometimes, and costly if it happens often. You have to shut everything down.
So that's the limitation you always have to design around with an SCP, ensuring you always have liquid at the inlet.
Yeah.
But assuming you you have those flooded conditions, the SCP has some major upsides, mostly because it's simpler, right? Let's talk cost. Efficiency.
Precisely. First off, the initial cost. The SCP design is pretty lean. Impeller, shaft, seal, casing. Not too complicated. That means less complex manufacturing, less material. So yeah, they tend to be significantly cheaper to buy up front.
Makes sense. And then there's the efficiency, the long-term win.
Yes. Because the internal pathway for the fluid is smooth and direct, there's less turbulence, less energy wasted, just churning the liquid around. Our sources really hammer this point, that simple design leads to higher hydraulic efficiency.
And that's not just a minor detail, is it? Especially for pumps running constantly.
Absolutely not. Think about a pump in a factory or a municipal water system running 247, even a few % difference in efficiency over 10, 15 years. That adds up to huge energy savings. Huge. The SCP is really optimized to move the most fluid for the least amount of power.
Plus, they're generally smaller and lighter, aren't they? Easier to fit into tight spots.
Yeah, the footprint is smaller.
Yeah.
And maintenance tends to be simpler, too. It's a mature technology. Technicians know them. Parts are usually easy to get. They're predictable, reliable workhorses, if you can guarantee that prime.
Okay, so what if you can't guarantee that prime? What if the water level drops or the system draws in air?
Well, that's where the self-priming pump, the SPP, comes into play. Think of it as an SCP that's been cleverly modified to solve that exact air problem. Its special trick is clearing the air out of the suction line all by itself. No manual priming needed.
Right, the self-priming bit. How does it actually do that? It must have a different design inside.
It does. The key is usually a much larger casing, which includes an internal reservoir designed to hold back some liquid after the pump stops.
Okay, a reservoir. So when it starts up with air in the line, what happens?
It uses that retained liquid, the impeller starts spinning, and it mixes the trapped liquid with the air from the suction line. It's a kind of churning action. This air-liquid mix goes into the large chamber. The air, being lighter, separates out and gets pushed out the discharge pipe. The heavier liquid, meanwhile, falls back down into the reservoir to be recirculated by the impeller.
Ah, I see. So it's using the liquid it held onto almost like a tool to gradually push the air out and create a vacuum in the suction line.
Exactly. It keeps doing the separating air, pushing it out, recirculating liquid until enough vacuum is built up to pull the actual source liquid up into the pump.
And once the liquid arrives?
Then it just switches over to pumping normally, like a standard centrifugal pump. And crucially, when it shuts off again, it retains enough liquid in that reservoir to repeat the process next time.
Clever. How long does that priming cycle usually take?
Oh, it varies. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe a few minutes, depends on the pump size and the suction lift. But the point is, it does it automatically, and repriming is usually very fast.
Okay, so that automatic priming, that ability to handle air, that unlocks some serious advantages, like lifting water from below the pump.
That's the big one, suction lift. You can place the SPP above the liquid level, drawing water out of a sump, a pit, from a riverbank, an underground tank. You know, our sources mention typical lifts of maybe 15, even up to 25 feet are possible. That saves a ton on installation costs, like not having to dig a deep pit for the pump.
Yeah, I can see that. What else? Does it handle air mixed in the flow better too?
It does. Because it's constantly designed to separate air, it's much more tolerant of entrained air bubbles or slugs of gas mixed in with the liquid. Think about wastewater, sewage, maybe agricultural runoff, stuff that releases gases. An SCP would likely airlock immediately. The SPP just keeps separating the air and keeps pumping. It's much more robust in those messy, mixed-phase applications.
So more reliable in unpredictable conditions, especially useful for places you can't easily get to for manual priming.
Definitely. Remote sites, unmanned stations, the SPP offers that operational security.
Okay, this sounds great. SPP handles air, handles suction lift, reprimes itself. Sounds like the superior pump.
Which brings us to the big question. If the SPP can do all this, why do we even still use SCPs? Why isn't the SPP just the standard everywhere?
Because that extra capability, that convenience, it comes at a price. There are significant trade-offs, mainly cost and efficiency.
Right. Let's break those down. First, the upfront cost. It's more expensive. Significantly. That larger, more complex casing with the reservoir and the internal recirculation passages, it requires more metal, more intricate casting, more machining. So, yeah, you're typically looking at, say, a 25% to maybe even 50% higher purchase price for an SPP compared to an SCP of similar performance specs, just to get that self-priming feature.
Wow, 25 to 50%.
Huh.
That's a big jump, especially on larger projects. But you mentioned efficiency, too. That's the long-term cost, right?
Exactly. And this is often the kicker. That internal recirculation mechanism, the very thing that makes it self-prime, it's always there, even when the pump is running normally, fully primed. It creates extra turbulence, extra friction inside the pump, internal energy losses. The result is that an SPP is inherently less efficient hydraulically than a comparable SCP, usually by about 5% to maybe 15%.
Okay, 5 to 15% lower efficiency. Let's translate that.
Yeah.
If you have, say, a 50 horsepower pump running continuously, what does that efficiency drop actually mean in terms of dollars?
It means you're paying more for electricity every hour, every day. That 5 to 15% less efficiency translates directly into 5 to 15% more energy consumption to do the same amount of work. Over the 10 or 15-year life of that pump, we're talking thousands, potentially tens of thousands of dollars in extra energy costs.
So the extra money you pay for the SPP up front, you could end up paying that again, maybe several times over, just in higher electricity bills.
Easily. It's a perpetual operating cost penalty. An OPEX tax you pay for the convenience of self-priming. Sometimes that convenience is worth it, absolutely. But often, maybe not.
That really reframes the decision. It's not just about the sticker price.
Not at all. It's the total cost of ownership.
Okay, but hold on. Quick practical question here. If the only issue with the SCP is keeping it primed, why not just put a foot valve on the end of the suction pipe? You know, a one-way valve to hold the water in. Seems cheaper than buying a whole SPP.
That's a really common thought and a good question. Yes, a foot valve can work to maintain prime, in theory. But foot valves introduce their own problems. They add another mechanical component that can fail. They can get clogged, especially if the water isn't perfectly clean. Think debris, sludge. They also add friction loss to the suction line, which makes the pump work slightly harder and increases the risk of other issues like cavitation.
So the SPP's internal priming is inherently more reliable because it avoids that extra mechanical valve down in the muck.
Exactly. Especially in wastewater or industrial applications with solids, maintenance teams often prefer the SPP just to eliminate that potential failure point. It's a reliability advantage.
Got it. Reliability versus a potentially failure-prone workaround. What about other differences, size and weight?
Yeah, the SPP is generally bigger and heavier because of that enlarged casing. That can make installation more difficult, especially if space is limited.
And maintenance. Is it more complex too?
A bit, yes. More internal parts, that recirculation system, it might require a bit more know-how to take apart and service compared to the very simple SCP. Parts might also be slightly less off the shelf.
Okay, one last technical point that sometimes comes up. NPSHR, net positive suction head required. You mentioned SPPs often need more NPSH. What does that mean practically?
Right. NPSHR is basically the minimum pressure needed at the pump inlet to stop the liquid turning into vapor, which causes cavitation, those damaging little implosions inside the pump. The SPP needs higher NPSHR, meaning it needs more pressure available on the suction side, mainly because of those internal losses and turbulence from the priming mechanism. Even when it's pumping normally, that internal complexity reduces the pressure right at the impeller eye.
So in simple terms, the SPP might be more likely to cavitate than an SCP if the suction conditions are already difficult, like a long pipe, high lift, or warm liquid.
That's the potential downside, yes. While it solves the priming issue, its higher MPSHR can make it more sensitive to challenging suction hydraulics. It's another trade-off. Sometimes, if cavitation risk is high, the SCP, despite needing priming, might actually be the safer choice.
Okay, this is great. We've really unpacked the differences and the trade-offs. So let's try and synthesize this. Let's give the listener some clear guidelines. When is the SCP definitely the way to go?
You choose the SCP when minimizing operating cost over the long haul is your #1 goal. So definitely when you have flooded suction, the liquid source is above the pump, gravity feeds it, no priming worries. Choose it for continuous duty applications where that 5% to 15% efficiency advantage really pays off over years of runtime. Think municipal water boosting, large HVAC loops, and generally for clean systems where air getting into the line isn't a realistic problem. If you can guarantee prime and want maximum efficiency, SCP is king.
Right. Simple conditions, maximum efficiency, lowest long-term cost.
Yeah.
And conversely, when do you accept the higher purchase price and the efficiency hit of the SPP? When is that the smart choice? You go with the SPP when you absolutely need that operational flexibility or reliability, and you're willing to pay for it.
Mhm.
So obviously, whenever suction lift is necessary, pumping from a sump, a tanker truck, below-grade tank, that's its classic application. Also, for intermittent use systems that start and stop frequently, like washdown stations, maybe emergency dewatering, that rapid auto-repriming is crucial there. And critically, anytime you expect air or gas mixed in the fluid, wastewater treatment, sewage lift stations, certain industrial slurries, places where an SCP would constantly fail, but the SPP's air handling keeps things running.
Yeah, or those remote, hard-to-reach locations we mentioned, where the cost or impracticality of manual priming makes the SPP's reliability essential. So it boils down to SCP for stable, efficient, flooded conditions, SPP for challenging, intermittent, or lift situations where reliability trumps peak efficiency.
Okay, perfect summary. So the final thought we want to leave you with today, it's really about looking beyond that initial price tag on the pump. The easy question is, can I afford the SPP? The real question, the one you need to wrestle with, is this. Is the convenience avoiding manual priming, handling potential air worth paying a permanent energy tax, potentially 5%, 10%, 15% higher electricity bills for the next decade or more?
That's the balancing act. Weighing the operational ease and reliability against that ongoing efficiency penalty. Getting that balance right is key to a successful, cost-effective system in the long run.